it. That's how we do, all of us, how we do with any new job. You know, your first 6 months at a new job suck. You're not good at things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you get better.
Yeah, it's a learning curve. And that's basically what's happening here
Right.
is their learning curve. I'm looking forward to when, and I'm really hoping that this will happen someday, and I know it's a ways. We've got an uphill climb to get to it, but that we're seen as our own beverage, like cider, like wine, like beer. And then instead of being like a subset of wine the way we are now, one of the biggest questions that I get all the time is, what does yearly mead production look like from year to year? And it's like, well, we have no idea. We don't know. Because that's tracked as part of wine, so it's not broken out. There's no way to say, here it is.
And to some extent that, knowing those numbers and things like that, that's on us as an industry. I think the only thing I'd say is that, like, cider is still not its own beverage.
Really?
Cider is still wine.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. I thought cider was cider.
It is not. You can't get a federal cidery license.
Aha.
You get either a winery or a brewery license.
Oh.
And they've managed to carve out a pretty good niche. And so, while I too agree that, like, at some level, the dream state would be for Mead to be such a major player on the market that finally we have our own, segment within the code.
Let's be real. We're like 1/10 of 1% of wine, so we're not exact. We're just a blip on the radar right now.
Would be totally happy with, like, where with the constant improvement and a constant sort of normalization of where we are. And if we all keep our winery permits, like, that's really not going to cost me sleep at night.
No. I only look at it from a tracking perspective as the only thing that it doesn't really matter what the license says as long as it lets you do what you need to do.
Right?
The license could say, it's a widget license as long as it lets you make mead, who cares?
Right. Well, and that's the other thing is, like, let's say that happened tomorrow and all of a sudden, this thing that we all say that we want where there's a separate meadery license exists. Well, does that meadery license allow you to make wine? What about cider?
Yeah. What about
Because now, now Ancient Fire Mead and Cider has a meadery license and can't make cider. I don't think Jason wants that.
I don't think so either.
I don't, as someone who, we make cider for another brand, but, like, I don't want that. Brad doesn't want that. Like, there's a lot of advantages to being where we are in the code. It allows us all to play in different markets, to make ciders if we want to do that. There are a bunch of meaderies that are, that make a wine, and there are a bunch of wineries that make a mead. With varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
But, like, these are good things, and I think there is this tendency that we have to look at every restriction and everything is status quo and see only its negatives, and not to think about, like, well, if you were to change this, there would be other rules, and those rules wouldn't necessarily benefit everybody. And so, if the goal is to allow us, if the goal is to allow us to make the beverages we want to make, then as far as I can tell, the best way to do that is to continue to ease restrictions on wineries. And that's going to involve working with Wine America and working with cider and working with representatives and continuing to do all these things. But I don't know that the best way to increase our freedoms is to create a new restrictive classification.
That's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, I never really looked at it that way. And like I say, my interest extends only to, I sure wish I could look at the overall production numbers and say this piece is mead somehow. I know we're mostly classified as other than standard wine, so I guess I could separate that much, but I would love to be able to pull us out of that somehow and be able to hand those numbers off to people that are looking to open a meadery and getting a business loan. There's no numbers. So, it falls back on us as an industry to do something about that, and I'm just going to have to figure out a way to do that from the other end,
Well, the thing is, though, that mead is so different from everything else. There's so many different ways of making it that it's really hard to write a definition that's going to encompass it all.
Well, and
it's also, and it also, like, you can have beer strength, you can have carbonated, you can have not carbonated, you can have, strong, you can have sweet, you can have dry. There's really no style called mead. And, in Canada anyways, you can make mead if you have a winery license, and you can make mead if you have a brewery license, but if you have a brewery license, it has to contain grain, so it's actually a braggot. But if I don't know if you go in as a meadery, as opposed to a winery, whether you can make wine. But the thing is, if you're as a meadery, you have to use your own honey. If you're as a winery, you have to use your own fruit. So I don't know whether there's some leeway in, if you're making the other at the same time. So it's one of those things where here you have to really choose how you're going to register yourself before you jump into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's one of those things where there's a number of different classifications, but they're all restricted. And as far as tracking numbers, I mean, so you can get from the government, you can get numbers on beer production, but that's going to include a lot of things that we might say, like, is that really beer? That's going to include a lot of malt liquors, I believe, alternatives, things like that, and we would say, well, is that really beer? If you want craft beer numbers, those come from the Brewers Association. Those come from an industry trade group. Right. I mean, and that's the thing. And so, like, if you get numbers from the Brewers Association next year, that will not include Flying Dog, which is not a member of the Brewers Association.
Yeah.
Which is a decent-sized brewery.
Yeah.
And has, political differences with the leadership of the Brewers Association over silliness. Okay. So, like, and honestly, it includes every small brewery who doesn't feel like spending $500 a year on the Brewers Association. So, like, those numbers largely are not reported by the government. The government can do kind of like big reporting things, usually regarding to revenue and taxes and things like that. But if it comes to tracking mead production and the mead industry, ultimately, I believe that needs to come from us. I believe that needs to come from the AMMA, from, working with, if there's a Canadian sort of faction or variant of it, that needs to come from us. That's going to have to be something that we get together as an industry and say, here's how we feel, how big our industry is. It's just, that is kind of how it works. Like, if you look at wine production, a lot of that comes from Wine America, not from the government.
That's true. You got a good point there. And I mean, honestly, and I've said this before, I'm looking seriously at just gathering together a group of people to sit down on the phones and to call each and every meadery in the country, whether or not they're members, and say, hi, we're trying to get this together, not just for the industry as a whole, but for all new meaderies that are coming in after y'all, to give, people something to work with so that they can say, hey, this is how big we are. This is how big our industry was. This is how big our industry is. This is how big we think our industry will be. To give them something to hang their hat on. Like, this is where we're at. This is what we've got.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I'll make those phone calls.
Yeah, I know. That's to say, I've got a bunch of people that have said they would. So, and I've got a list of the meaderies, and I've got people right now that are checking and expanding and correcting the list to verify all the information on it. So, hopefully, within by after the conference and the Mazer Cup, we'll have a valid list that includes everybody we know about.
Yeah, and I think that'll kind of be a solid sort of last point, which is like, a lot of the responsibility for all of these things, like, and you said earlier that government, the wheels of government turn slow, or my favorite expression, moves at the speed of government.
Yeah.
Like,
my daughter's in the Army, so I totally get it. It's hurry up and wait.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A military time means more than one thing. So, like, a lot of the responsibility for enacting any change does not fall on the government. It falls on the people in the industry to have the organization and to have the compelling sort of, force to make that case and to work as one and to row in the same direction.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's the next step for the meat industry, is to get everyone together in the way that wine and beer and cider do, and to continue to consolidate that so that we have these numbers and so that we do work together. And then we can go to whatever government official or agency we need to and say, this is what we represent and this is how we feel as one.
Yeah. That gives us some swing.
It's also just, if you can't do that, then asking a large body to change isn't really reasonable, right? If you can't organize yourselves, asking the government to make changes for you is not a reasonable request.
Yeah.
It's not how any democratic system is built. Like it or lump it, and it does move slower, there's no question about it, but the responsibility for change falls on the citizenry. And in our case, that's our industry. And I think that what we've seen in the last year has been awesome, that there's been so much energy dedicated to it, so much, progress, and so many people really working toward things going in a better direction that we've seen real results.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Yeah, and then, we as an industry need to pull together and if we can help that change, we can help them do what needs to be done to make things smooth-ish for us. It's what we do. It's all we can do, really. It's...
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I like it. I'm looking forward to see what else you're bringing to the table at your talk at the conference next month. That's, this was pretty dense tonight, so, it's going to be really interesting to see what else you've got.
Well, yeah, that's the thing is that, any of these conversations, it's really tough because it's like I can go at a high level and, like, I can get as into the weeds as anybody to the point where, like, half the people in the audience won't know what I'm saying. So I have to really walk that line between being like, guy who asked me a question, yes, here's the answer to that question, but here's how it might apply to other people. And then, also just being willing to say to when it comes to state laws or meaderies in other countries, it's like, some of these I know and some of these I really don't. What I can do is help, I think what the AMMA can do is give you the tools to get a group of people together in your state or nation, whatever, and start to organize and track these things yourself so that when you're talking to your governments, those conversations are productive.
Well, we'll have to start dragging you around the country for TTB meetups, huh?
As long as there's, free meads involved.
I'm pretty sure we can manage the free mead part without too much trouble, so... We just added Chrissie into the conversation. Yeah, right. Yeah, here's all the experimental stuff. We're still waiting for label approvals on this, Greg.
What's in this? Wormwood. What?
What? Yeah. Oh, that's got rat poison in it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we've got Chrissie on the line too.
Why is
we just
this
brought
glowing?
her in. Hey, Chrissie.
Hi there. Wow, what a weird moment to join.
I know, right?
Rat poison.
Rat poison. Yeah. Did you even know this? Yeah. No, we were just talking about. We've been talking about recipe approvals with Greg, and we were talking about some of the weird stuff people are trying to put in there, and then the TTB's saying, what? Turn your sound on your end, Chrissie. I'm getting feedback.
Oh, is that not sounding good?
No, you were fine. It's just that I was getting feedback on my end. You guys hearing this?
Okay. Mm-hmm. Let me try one.
Just don't have the show playing in the background, and you should be fine.
Is that better that way?
About,
yeah, that's better.
In Mead.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. But yeah, Greg's been on for the first hour talking about TTB and what's going on there and what he's learned and that kind of thing, and I'm pretty sure that he's got at least another 2 hours in him at the conference. So we just scratched the surface tonight.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to hearing all that at the conference. I can't wait for the big conference.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to see what you got to what you got to say. Yeah, Hamish is saying rat poison is heart medication. It's also a blood thinner. I take it every day. It's called Coumadin. They really love that stuff,
You're going to be the person in the back of the session with popcorn, right?
Yeah.
Right?
I'm going to put on a Michael Jackson mask and sit in the back of popcorn,
Well, thank you guys very much, and I appreciate you having me on. I'm looking forward to seeing you all out in Denver.
Thanks, Greg. We appreciate it. We'll see you next month, man. Well, actually, I'll talk to you next week probably, but yeah.
Take care, guys.